Every one of these places has awesome people, lots of tangible and intangible assets, and lots of dreams. So that's what we start in with is, what do you dream of? It's all community-led and community-centric, because the only people that can build a community and sustain it are the people that live and work there. So they're the ones that have to be dreaming it and co-creating it.
Hey everyone, it's Hildy, and this is the Creating the Future podcast. I'm glad you've joined us here today. This is a place for us to explore what really creates social change. What will actually create the healthy, joyful future we all want to live in? I'm so happy that Jeff Yost is joining us for the podcast today. Jeff is president and CEO of the Nebraska Community Foundation, where their focus truly is on that word community. Under Jeff's leadership, the foundation's work is about unleashing abundant local assets and connecting people all across Nebraska's 93 counties. Jeff has dedicated the bulk of his career to NCF's community-led, asset-based efforts. And so it is my joy to welcome Jeff Yost to the podcast today. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hildy, thank you. It's my honor.
Could you start out by just sharing a little bit about your story? What is it in your life that has led you to be so passionate about social justice and social change?
I'll start with this. I'm a child of the Great Plains. I grew up in a little bitty town called Red Cloud, Nebraska, which is on the Nebraska-Kansas border. Isolated enough that in high school we had to drive 40 miles to a movie. So myself and my 22 classmates, we were living in a pretty isolated little place. And I got out of high school in 1986. And in 1986, in the middle of the country, we were in the height of the farm crisis. So lots of people were losing their farms. There was just massive dislocation. And through all of this economic upheaval throughout that decade, lots of things changed in those sorts of communities, those sorts of rural places, and in the psyche of those sorts of rural places. And that psyche had been eroding for some time, but it really was one of these moments in time where just lots of things shifted. So as I recall it now, and of course this is many decades later, I was absolutely loved as a child. I lived in a place where everything and everybody worked. There was enormous amounts of kindness and goodness and neighborliness. And for some reason, everybody was telling their kids their future someplace else.
Wow.
There wasn't a moment in time. These are all the things that you now sort of recall and put into context.
Sure.
But in my 20s, I began to really think about the oddness of growing up in a place where everything is good and everybody is telling you that your future is someplace else because they just can't see the future. So I'm going to fast forward and then we'll kind of come back to some of these elements. I believe COVID did in 20 months what I tried to work on for 20 years.
Wow.
Which was proof of concept for remote work. For a long time, I've embraced the notion that the correct community economic development question in the 21st century isn't one of jobs, it's one of place. Why do I want to live and work and raise my family in this place? And that's the work we do at the Nebraska Community Foundation. We're in the place building business and helping people to build communities of choice that they want to be a part of.
Wow.
And remote work became a big part of that, but there's lots and lots of things that have changed. And certainly we've seen this with the next generation and the generation after that, that much of the conventional wisdom that I was raised with no longer exists with people in their 20s and 30s and 40s. It only exists with people in their 50s and 60s and people that are older than that.
Wow.
So my path was a typical one or an atypical one. I went off to college. I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. I ended up getting trained as an economist. I was doing lots of policy and politics work in college and right after college. Right after college, went to work for a Fortune 500 company. Within 6 months, decided that's not what I wanted to do. So I came back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and kind of hung out my shingle doing politics work and policy work and economic analysis work, and that went fine. And then about 4 years into that, I got recruited by the governor's office here in Nebraska to come in and do lots of special projects for them. So the work I was getting to do in my 20s in the governor's office was all around federalism and devolution, and it was sort of the height of reinventing government. So I was given lots of space, lots of time, lots of freedom to begin to think about what are all the different ways we can begin to think about the balance of power between the federal government and the states. What are all the things that are going to change as America gets older and entitlements take up a greater and greater portion of the federal budget? And how are communities going to continue to manage change? I mean, one of the things that I have thought long and hard about is being a locally elected official today in comparison to being a locally elected official like my father was. My father spent probably 20 plus years on the local school board in Red Cloud in the late 1950s, the 1960s, into the 1970s. And in those days, you didn't have lots of state and federal programs to help with local education. You had to figure out, okay, we have this amount of resource. Our mandate is to educate these children. How do we do that? So you had to think about that as a locally elected official in a really holistic way. Fast forward to today, or even fast forward to the 1990s, so much of that discretion had been taken away.
Right.
And that changes the entire leadership experience. So in the 1990s in particular, you began to see single issue candidates. You began to see people not focusing on the holistic nature of being a member of the Board of Education, but really focusing in on one or two things that they were especially frustrated about within social and societal policy as opposed to just educational policy. And you can take that and use that example throughout governance. So I spent about 5 years in state government. I had an awesome experience. But what I did decide is I wanted to work on longer timelines than 2 and 4 and 6 year elected cycles. And I didn't like the binary nature of our political system. So some friends of mine had started this little fledgling thing called the Nebraska Community Foundation. There weren't any employees. There was hardly any money. And I was looking around for other opportunities and getting lots of interest from lots of folks. But they said, we know you love Nebraska. Are you interested in giving this a shot? And I was like, sure, I'll give this a shot. We just had our first baby. So, of course, that was the perfect time to go from having a nice steady paycheck to no guaranteed paycheck at all. So that was in 1998. And all of that time doing politics and policy in the governor's office, the community foundation in particular is this tool you can build to suit. Right? I'm in the community building business. What's that mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so there's just been this enormous learning journey. I've been here for 27 years now. And this enormous learning journey of how and why and who. How do we engage people on what issue? Is it issue oriented, or what are all the different pieces that go into this? So the things that have really resonated with me over the years are first and foremost what's called asset-based community development, helping people to really understand all of the goodness in their place, tangible and intangible. Because if we're planning from a sense of optimism and abundance, it's so much different than planning from a standpoint of deficit and scarcity.
Absolutely.
So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is you have to do this work so it makes sense for the culture and the norms and the people in the place. The only people that can build and sustain communities are the people that live and work in them. Mm-hmm. So we really have to have a Hippocratic oath in this work of not coming in and doing things to people or for people, but doing our work with people so they can build the community they dream of. The third piece of this is really within the context of Venn diagrams. Let's focus on all of our commonalities. Let's not focus on what divides us or what we don't agree upon. And if there was one thing that I could really help people in 2025 lean into, is how do we lean into our commonalities this year as opposed to just continuing to accentuate our differences? And so many things are now set up on a tribal basis. Our news coverage is set up on a tribal basis. Our political system is set up on a tribal basis. Lots of our social stratification is now set up in these sort of tribal forms. But that's not how communities work.
Right.
So how can we know, love, respect, admire our friends and neighbors? And how can we really embrace our commonalities and respect one another's differences and have conversations about all of that and continue to learn and grow and continue to think about, okay, how do we do better for the next generation? And it's wonderful work. It's my life's work. And many, many days it absolutely feels like a conundrum. But one of the questions that you had asked me to kind of focus in on here is, when you see change happening in communities, what factors do you see causing the change? So the short answer I'll have for you today is this, and I think it's four pieces. It's a collective vision of what we want. It's collective courage to get there. It's the teamwork to make sure that we've got one another's backs. So, I mean, if we're being courageous alone, not going to work. And all of that has to be vested and rooted in trust. We're big fans at the Nebraska Community Foundation that change doesn't happen because of ideas. Change happens along the lines of relationships at the speed of trust. And that is absolutely true for positive change that sticks. There's lots of negative change that can happen in transactional ways and happen really fast. But if we want to focus on positive transformational change, it has to be relationship based, and it has to have elements of both benefit to oneself, but mutual benefit as well. You have to be able to see that this is going to improve your life, not just someone else's life. And that's the community building work that we've tried to pursue. And then the other piece that we're always trying to come back to is, there's an enormous amount of good science out there, but for some reason, it feels like we've got large swaths of society that don't want to focus on science and everything we've learned. So not only do we want to build out those relationships and that deep trust to be able to share that information, but how can your experiments, how can your community building work really be rooted in what we've learned? The example I'll use is early childhood development. We started doing the Perry preschool work in the 1960s. We have known so much about early childhood development, so much about infant and toddler brain development for so many decades now. And the science has just continued to evolve very rapidly. But our community practice is still lagging. But if we're going to be communities of choice and communities that are attracting young people with options, early childhood development in 2025 is no longer a luxury. I think of it as a utility. It's one of these things that's a must-have if, in fact, you're trying to have your community be in competition for young hearts and minds. So what are all the things we can do to figure out how to make our place attractive?
Right.
And then the other piece that I'll go ahead and kick in now, and then we can keep talking, but I think the other piece that's come along with COVID, and we're continuing to suffer from it, is an epidemic of loneliness and an enormous number of people not feeling a sense of belonging. And a huge piece of community leadership in the 21st century, again, isn't about the vision. It isn't about the hierarchical leadership. It's about being connectors.
Yeah.
How do we help people that have gifts appreciate and understand their gifts, and then invite them to share their gifts? And when we have the opportunity to share our gifts, that creates a sense of belonging, because belonging isn't something I can give you. It's something you have to feel yourself. And typically you feel that because you've contributed, you've been a co-creator of making something better.
The theologian Robert Thurman talks about the fact that when we give, we feel stronger because we feel we have something to share. And when we take, we feel weaker because we don't feel like we have that.
Through the Nebraska Community Foundation, again, foundation is in our name. We do manage lots of money, all that sort of stuff. Money is just a tool to get stuff done. I'm in the community building business. We're using philanthropy as one of many, many tools.
So talk about that a little bit, Jeff. Talk about what that looks like in community, because you are an umbrella. NCF serves as sort of an umbrella for all of the funds in small, tiny little communities. Mm-hmm. What does it look like to be a community builder when you're working with community, not coming into community? Give me an example.
So I mentioned that Hippocratic Oath earlier, and that Hippocratic Oath is all about our community building practice is community-centric and community-led, and we're a value-added partner. We're not going to do anything to somebody or for somebody. We're only going to do work with people. So in the true sense of a partnership, that's our community building practice. Many, many systems have been built out on the expert model. And with information technology, with information being so ubiquitous these days, you can go and do your own research. And I don't want to go down that particular rabbit trail. But expertise is very different than it used to be. So lots and lots of our expertise is related to issues and how things work and how things connect and are interdependent on a community level. But at least as much of our expertise and our value add is about group dynamics. It's about helping groups to form, storm, norm, perform. It's all about that whole idea that you've got to allow people to sort of find their rhythm. The whole Nebraska Community Foundation network, we work in about 270 communities around Nebraska. In 82 of 93 counties. So it's a huge geographic footprint in a place the size of Nebraska. There's 1,500 community leaders that serve as volunteer fund advisory committee members.
What does that mean?
A fund advisory committee member is a community volunteer who has said, I want to be a part of helping to build this local organization, and that's a community foundation fund. Typically, if you're a board member of a small entity like that, you end up spending most of your time doing fiduciary care work.
Sure.
One of the services of the Nebraska Community Foundation is by being a part of the Nebraska Community Foundation, by being an affiliated fund, the Nebraska Community Foundation does all of the fiduciary care. So community volunteers can do what they volunteered to do, which was work on the projects, work on the mission of their particular community building entity. So that's part of the value add. The better parts of the value add, in my opinion, are we do a tremendous amount of education and training work. So we help community leaders to not only work on group skills and teamwork, we work on skills.
Like
what are the different elements of early childhood development that we really need to understand as it relates to this particular place. So it might be issue-oriented. It might be within the context of leadership and group dynamics, as we talked about. It might be within the context of fundraising and donor development. It might be within the context of how do you really build out mutually beneficial collaborations. Many, many times when organizations come together, it's not really a merger, it's more of an acquisition.
Yeah.
So how do you help people not have those unintended consequences of building out those sorts of partnerships? And to a large extent, it's just helping people continue to be adaptable based upon their circumstances. So a lot of my time is spent on how might we do this just a little differently? What have we learned? How might we be able to use financial tools in different ways? What are we observing that we need to then continue to sort of feed back into the network to help the network continue to evolve toward what's next. So none of it is fast. All of this is generational work. I refer to all of this work as post-partisan because this is community change work that happens in a much longer time frame than election cycles.
Good.
And we're trying to help people to build habits, build relationships, build mutuality, so they can begin to build some traction. And that traction and that success then begins to change the narrative about what's possible.
Give me a story. Give me an example
Sure.
of a project where you've seen that happen.
So many of them. I'll talk about my little hometown of Red Cloud. I know this well. My mother passed away last year, but my parents both lived their entire lives in Red Cloud, Nebraska. Two of my sisters and their families continue to live in Red Cloud. I'm one of 6. So there's lots and lots of deep connection, and my kids think of Red Cloud as a second hometown. So this is a place we've been deeply immersed in for all 57 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Red Cloud's out in the middle of the prairie, had to drive 40 miles to a movie in high school. It's about 1,000 people. For decades, it's been a losing population. It's been aging. It's been really frustrated with lack of economic opportunity. I mean, all these things that thousands of places encounter, right?
Right.
Red Cloud, Nebraska has a world-class cultural asset in the fact that it was the childhood home of Willa Cather, the American author Willa Cather, who's written many, many novels. Seldom did she refer to it as Red Cloud. She almost always had a pseudonym for Red Cloud, and she had a pseudonym for the characters. So it's historical fiction, but lots of it is based in Red Cloud and on characters from Red Cloud and all these things that happen. About 8,000 pilgrims a year come from around the world to visit Red Cloud, Nebraska.
Wow.
So in a town of 1,000 people way out in the prairie, unheard of. But many, many of the town fathers over time had continued to think their economic future was in agriculture. So they would talk about things like, well, we need to get an ethanol plant. So for at least a decade, I spent a lot of time helping community leaders, both quantitatively and qualitatively, understand that an ethanol plant probably isn't something that's going to happen in Red Cloud because of water, transportation, logistics, workforce, and the fact that we were already importing corn into this county to feed the cattle.
Oh, wow.
Right? So what was working in other places wasn't necessarily going to work in Red Cloud. Right there in front of them, though, was this kind of invisible, or at least invisible to some people, world-class cultural asset. I think the Community Foundation Fund in Red Cloud started in 1999. It took about a decade to get it up and going. 2 people that graduated from high school about the time my parents did, so they all kind of grew up together. Gave a challenge grant back to my hometown, so they gave $100,000 if $100,000 could be raised to begin to create what's called an unrestricted endowment. And this is a tool we use in lots of places to basically help people have some discretionary money. Back to this whole idea of not having discretion in your public budget. You need to be able to have discretionary money from someplace else. So the Fund Advisory Committee, we were having these conversations about economic development and economic prosperity in Red Cloud over time, and how do we begin to change some of these narratives that are happening. Made a grant to fund an economic impact study to answer this question, which is, what would happen if a small portion of the 8,000 tourists to Red Cloud a year spent the weekend as opposed to spent the day?
Wow.
So it's not changing it completely. It's taking advantage of something that's already occurring. So that economic impact study was very positive. These are tourists that are happy to spend money. They're well educated. They're coming from a long ways away. They're very interested in having an experience in the prairie because that's what Cather's novels are all about.
Sure.
How do you begin to build out an economic engine, not based in traditional commodity agriculture, but an economic engine based upon this world-class cultural asset that people are already coming to see? So we've helped Red Cloud in a whole number of ways to explore building out an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this is something we worked with them on for a decade. What are the conditions that we can build out in this community to help entrepreneurs thrive? And how might they be able to both serve and make a living based upon these higher end tourists that are coming to experience Red Cloud and to experience Cather? So the Community Foundation Fund in 2013, and again, it takes a while for these things to form and storm before they can norm and perform. So that's true with any of these volunteer groups. But by 2012, 2013, the Red Cloud folks were really getting themselves well organized and thinking about these key questions. We facilitated multiple visioning sessions, and one of the visioning sessions and impact planning sessions, they ultimately decided they were going to focus on two areas. They were going to focus on heritage tourism as their local economic development strategy, and they were going to focus on early childhood development.
Wow.
With the idea that if you're going to be a community of choice, you really need to have these kind of key developmental services for young families. So they focused in on two things. They had been building their unrestricted endowment. So one of the first things we helped them do was write a job description for Heritage Tourism Development Director. And he wasn't going to do work around every kind of economic development there. He was going to be focused on heritage tourism. He is now entering his 8th year of doing that work. He's a graduate of Red Cloud and moved back home to do this work. So raising his family there and doing awesome work. Simultaneous to all of this, the Willa Cather Foundation, which is local, was doing all of this redevelopment of downtown and the Moon Block in particular. So there's lots of intersecting parts here, which is all what's supposed to happen. So long story short, economic development in Red Cloud has just gone gangbusters. There's lots and lots of people that are now spending the weekend as opposed to spending the day. Earlier this year, the Hotel Garber, Silas Garber was one of Nebraska's first governors from Red Cloud. Hotel Garber opened. It's a 27-room boutique hotel in downtown Red Cloud. It's a $9 million project in this little town of 1,000 people, and immaculate, right? It's not like a little chain hotel on the side of town. This is all part of the experience, and this is all the stuff that we've been trying to help them curate over time, is how do all of these things build upon the experience.
Sure.
So that's all gone really well. The Valley Child Development Center opened in 2018. That's an early childhood development center that's serving 70 children, infant through kindergarten. So that's gone incredibly well, and having world-class early childhood in this place has made this particular place a magnet for young families.
So are they moving back? Are they coming back?
Yes, for sure. The Community Foundation Fund was not only helping to lead all of these pieces, but also building its unrestricted endowment. So their unrestricted endowment in Red Cloud is north of $2 million. So they have about $100,000 a year of discretionary income to not only be able to subsidize things like early childhood development and heritage tourism. Last year, the private owners of the skilled nursing facility, the nursing home, declared that in 60 days they were going to close the nursing home. This is happening sort of post-COVID in lots and lots of places because of nursing home finances. Community Foundation Fund, along with the hospital and some other folks, sort of collectively stepped up. The Nebraska Community Foundation helped them with this. That's all part of this relationship-based thing. The hospital administrator was able to get an NDA to look at the nursing home finances. We determined we needed to have about $20,000 a month to be able to subsidize the nursing home and keep it in operation. Ultimately able to get the nursing home transferred from the private owners to the county hospital. And the census count in the nursing home has gone back up. It's now cash flowing. And if the Community Foundation Fund hadn't been there, lots of those donor connections hadn't been there, we hadn't been building all of this leadership capacity and partnerships over time, they wouldn't have been in a position to be able to step forward and provide sort of immediate relief for this thing that nobody saw coming.
Wow.
So it's a wonderful story, and it's one of many, many stories where communities are kind of reimagining their future. Agriculture is going to continue to be a huge part of these economies, but agriculture can't be the thing that you're going to focus on to repopulate many of these places. Agriculture is going to continue to be this thing that probably takes fewer people, especially within just production agriculture, not value-added agriculture.
What does this look like, Jeff, in a community that doesn't have such a world-class asset like a Willa Cather? What does it look like in a ye old average community that will typically tell you we have nothing?
Right. And part of what we do is we'll help them explore that question.
What does that look like?
There's a method called appreciative inquiry, and it's just conversations with people, but it's conversations with people about what's right, not what's wrong. Mm-hmm. What do we have versus what do we don't have? And then you use that as the basis to dream about what we could be. In Nebraska, and the things I love about Nebraska, Nebraska is where I'm from, it's where my family lives, it's where my heart is. So this is home. That's first and foremost. Nebraska is 1.9 million people, so if you don't know somebody, you know somebody that knows somebody. So this isn't 7 degrees from Kevin Bacon. We're only 2 degrees of separation in Nebraska, which ultimately means that this can be relationship-based. We can actually figure out those Venn diagrams and those commonalities, and we can get stuff done together because this is manageable. And how do we manage all of this in ways that help people to have opportunities, and more importantly, create communities that are attractive for the next generation to say, I want to be a part of. So in every one of Nebraska's communities, there are many, many, many assets. And we've studied this massive intergenerational transfer of wealth. So the Nebraska Community Foundation's really taken the lead on that over the years. In 2021, we did our third transfer of wealth study. The first one was in 2002. In Nebraska, 1.9 million people. We think in the next 10 years, $100 billion is transferring from one generation to the next in Nebraska.
Wow.
Now, given where many heirs moved over time, that's potentially an enormous threat because the heirs no longer live where they grew up.
Sure.
So how do you talk with the parents, and how do you talk with lots and lots of people that did return to their places after college or stayed there their whole lives, about what if all of us just began to build out an ethos of we're going to give back 5% of what we have to the places that gave us these great lives? So that campaign we call 5 to Thrive. And we're having great success with helping people to think about, okay, I'm not only going to give time, talent, treasure, talk during my lifetime, I'm actually going to make legacy gifts back to my home place as a part of supporting the next generation. This is the ethos we're trying to build out. I want to circle back around to your question, which is how does this look in places that aren't Red Cloud, Nebraska, that have this world-class cultural asset? Every one of these places has habits, awesome people, lots of tangible and intangible assets, and lots of dreams. So that's what we start in with is what do you dream of? Many, many people will dream of various community facilities. So this could be in education, this could be in healthcare, this could be in libraries or parks and recreation. Many, many places have really interesting histories of small-scale manufacturing or other things, but lots of interest in entrepreneurship. So we've helped lots of and again, it all depends on the place and the preferences of the place, right? We're not taking an agenda into these places.
Right.
We're helping these places manifest, well, first of all, fully articulate and then manifest their dreams.
Sure.
And then the really important part about the dreams part is the dreams part usually doesn't start big. It usually starts pretty modestly. These are very practical people, right? Very Midwestern. You have the whole Midwestern modesty thing. So the way we talk about dreams is dreams are iterative. Let's accomplish a dream, and then we're in a position to dream bigger dreams. So in many, many communities we work with, it starts with a fairly modest project, It might be an accessible playground.
And these are all projects that are coming from the community, not from your ideas.
Oh, no. No, I mean, we're sharing lots of stories all the time, and we're doing lots of peer learning between all of these people in the network. But it's all community-led and community-centric, because the only people that can build a community and sustain it are the people that live and work there.
Yep.
So they're the ones that have to be dreaming it and co-creating it. We're just their value-added partner in helping them get there in however we might do that. So in many cases, you start with a fairly modest project of some sort. And in some places, that has been a new facility for the post office to be, so the post office can continue to be there. In some places, it's parks and recreation. In some places, it's something associated with curriculum enhancement for the K-12 school system. In some places, it's a health clinic. I mean, it can look all sorts of different ways. But then in every one of these places we're working, what we say right off the bat is we're not interested in doing project work exclusively. We're interested in helping you build endowments, and especially unrestricted endowments, because beginning to have, in just round numbers, this isn't exactly how the math would work, but if you have about a $2.1 million endowment, you could have about $100,000 a year of payout for that.
Sure.
And then we would inflation proof that every year or so you're protecting the purchasing power of that. So in lots of places, we'll actually use the context of, okay, you have this massive transfer of wealth, even $1 million is just a tiny, tiny little bit of that transfer of wealth in your place. If that was endowed and it created a perpetual stream of income, what would you do with that stream of income? And for many people, it sort of takes some practice to get there.
Of course.
Right? We haven't thought this way.
We live in that sense of scarcity. It's hard sometimes to get out of that.
Right. So we practice with people, and then they're interacting with lots and lots of peers from other places that have already been doing this work. I'll give you a little place of Shickley, Nebraska. Shickley, Nebraska is just over 300 people.
Wow.
I had the opportunity to start working with Shickley almost 25 years ago. And what the people from Shickley told me when we first started talking was, we're a little town, we have a school, and we want to keep a school. Okay. All right. There's probably lots of other stuff that's going to happen too. Mm-hmm. So Shickley over time has built a new library, built a new community center, built all sorts of parks and recreational things to really help with quality of life in this particular place. Probably half of their grant making from their unrestricted endowment. Their unrestricted endowment is now almost $3 million.
Of 300 people.
Of 300 people, right? There's plenty of money in all of these places. It's a function of motivation, inspiration, trust, reciprocity, and then making sure that everybody sees that the money is being spent well.
Of course.
To perpetuate what our community has dreamt of. Probably half of that grant making has gone back to supporting that school district. So the school district, and this is actually a land-rich school district, and in Nebraska we're overly reliant upon property taxes. But the school district was actually able to assume the responsibilities for starting and perpetuating a really high-quality early childhood development center. So as opposed to having that be its own nonprofit, it's actually just part of the school district.
Wow.
It's just constantly figuring out what are the particular circumstances here.
And it's really building on what you've got. It really is that asset-based approach of building on what you've got. We've got nothing. We happen to have a school. We happen to have a school district. We happen to have mechanisms. We don't even think of those things as assets to build upon. Absolutely. And with the community economic development question today is not one of jobs, it's one of place. Why do I want to live and work here? Then all of these things I'm talking about are essential elements in raising your children until they're ready to go off to college. Very much so. Small towns aren't for everybody, but huge numbers of people want to raise their children in smaller places where there are more intimate relationships. People should absolutely have that option. And then absolutely have that option that those are also places that have a variety and a good selection of
entertainment, arts and cultural opportunities. We know sports are a big deal in all these places. So how do we use philanthropy to help enhance all of those pieces? And then continue to use all of what we're learning to share back with the network. What could you dream of? So in NCF's strategic framework, the strategic framework for the statewide organization, one of our 6 goals in our strategic framework is how do we help communities use the payout from their unrestricted endowment to create change that otherwise may not occur.
Sure.
So it's not about just perpetuating the status quo.
Right.
It's about continuing to help people to use that money as a margin of excellence, not money to just replace other money.
To dream.
Above and beyond what we're already doing as taxpayers for the federal government, the state government, local governments. Sure. But we're just seeing that in so many different places, in Laurel, Nebraska, in Ord, Nebraska, in Arnold, Nebraska, in McCook, Nebraska, in Nebraska City, and dozens of places. They're doing it in different ways. Many of them are using it to do really high-end, productive youth engagement strategies,
such as
are intimately involved in co-creating these elements. So in McCook, Nebraska, their youth advisory committee took on a project, and the local fund gave them a small grant to pursue this, but they now have a new drive-in movie theater in McCook, Nebraska that they call Cars Under the Stars. And that was all initiated and all done by high school students. Well, these kids are now co-creators of their place. So next week, there's high school students from lots of other Nebraska communities coming to McCook. And the kids from McCook are going to share with them why they're so proud of McCook, why they love McCook, and then talk them through, this is how we organize this community building practice. This is how we raise this money. This is how we built these partnerships to be able to get this particular project, in this case, a drive-in movie theater in McCook, Nebraska.
So it doesn't become about sharing the thing, because so often we're trying to replicate the thing. Oh, well, we'll get a drive-in movie theater also. But it really is about replicating the process, the thought process, yes, the questions that they asked and the thinking that went into it.
The best ABCD practice isn't ABCD practice, it's ABCD thinking.
Yeah.
That's right. And all of the creative thinking pieces that you've put out, the good work around design thinking. We speak about intentionality in our network extensively. Plan the work and work the plan, because the thing that we've helped people begin to change their conventional wisdom on, by looking at this whole intergenerational transfer of wealth, by understanding, and the Nebraska Community Foundation has now reinvested about $550 million in Nebraska communities since 1994. About 300 million of that is in the last decade. So there's a lot of money being given and reinvested back into these places. So there really is a flywheel happening.
Yeah.
People are beginning to really understand that money isn't the limiting factor in what we dream of. And that was the whole nature of this, is usually the scarcity mentality comes from, we don't have enough money to do this. Well, sometimes it's money, but sometimes it's partnerships, sometimes it's collaboration, sometimes it's reimagining an existing asset in a new way, and just continuing to really be open to what's possible, as opposed to just relying upon what's happened previously.
We frequently say that when we change the way we see things, things change. And
right.
You're really changing the way people are thinking about their community, thinking about their assets, thinking about themselves.
Another thing that we've played with that's been a really interesting learning experience. So in 2019, and this had been a thought for a long time, I've always thought internships were pretty stupid.
Okay.
Because most internships, the intern would be really frustrated because they're like, well, they didn't give me any real work to do. Right? We ask interns to make copies and get coffee.
Exactly.
none of it's like a blast from heaven or something, but we decided to go ahead and experiment. And what it's turned out to be is called hometown interns. And the whole idea is a college student would come home for the summer and would be paid to discover all of the assets and abundance in their home place.
Wow.
And then share that with their community members, specifically their fund advisory committee. So the Nebraska Community Foundation, through an anonymous donor, puts up half the money, and the local affiliated fund puts up half the money. And we've put together a pretty generalized curriculum for these young people and their local champion to begin to explore and identify the assets in their home place. And again, this is a place they know well. They're in all likelihood living with their parents, but they've gone off. You need to have been away from home for at least a year to participate in this, because you need to be able to look at it with fresh eyes.
Great.
When you're 19, you're not jaded yet.
Right.
Right? But you are looking at all these things with fresh eyes. And so much of asset-based community development is making the invisible visible.
Yep.
So this is a whole experiment in that. This lightly facilitated curriculum that they go through for 10 weeks, all of it's locally based work, and they're identifying all of this and then sharing it, and then beginning to figure out what might we do with this. Well, in 10 weeks, that isn't going to be fully manifested. It's just sort of catalyzing all of it. But at the end of the process, each of these hometown interns write a love letter to their hometown.
Oh.
And it's my favorite day of the year. This year we have 24 hometown interns. So in early August, all of them will share with all of their community leaders and all of us from around the state. So all of us do it as one great big Zoom.
Wow.
And they read their love letters. And what is happening is these young people usually start the summer with, would you be interested in living in your hometown as an adult? And the answer is typically maybe. At the end of the summer, almost all of them are like, oh, I've totally fallen in love with this place. I'm going to design my future so I can live, work, and raise my family here.
Wow.
It's this whole attraction strategy. We didn't make anybody do anything. We created the conditions to help these young people and their adult champions to have this hopefully transformative experience. So many of these hometown interns love coming back and doing it for a second summer.
Oh, of course.
In many communities, there's now 2 or 3 hometown interns as opposed to just one. And it is changing the narrative of not only what is possible, but what we think of ourselves. It's not only changing the realities on the ground, it's changing the meta-narrative about who we are. And that's the stuff that then, as an economist, that's the stuff that creates capital flow. Rationality is only part of finance. Emotion is a huge part of finance. And one of the rationales for why there was so much disinvestment in so many of these places for so long is because the narrative was negative. If we can have a more positive narrative, and I'm not trying to have a Pollyanna narrative, I'm trying to have a realistic narrative.
Sure.
But if the realistic narrative, and especially if that narrative is coming from a young adult, that's pretty darn inspiring for lots of other people who really do love Nebraska and love their home place in similar ways that I do.
Jeff, it is so inspiring and exciting to listen to all of what is possible when we change the way we're thinking. Is there something that you would suggest to our listeners, something tangible that they could start to do right now that could lead them on that path?
Sure. Maybe try this. I mean, there's 100 different things we could do. Go have 3 conversations in the next week with somebody you know very well, somebody you know reasonably well, and somebody you don't hardly know at all, and ask them 2 questions. What do you love about this place? What would make you love this place more?
So simple and so powerful.
And depending on who you're talking to, maybe there's traction there, maybe there's not. But this is not typical conversation. And the whole nice part about the unrestricted endowment work that I was talking about earlier, one of the most important parts about those donor visitations for unrestricted endowments is when the prospective donor says, "What are you going to spend the money on?" The solicitor says, "I don't know. What do you think we should spend the money on?" And all of a sudden we're having a discussion about the future. And we don't have very many discussions about the future of our place. We may have discussions about a new highway thoroughfare. We may have discussions about a new healthcare facility or a new school, but we're not necessarily having discussions about the future of our place. And discussions about the future of our place, and that's exactly what I'm getting to with those two simple little questions. That's a powerful incentive for people to move away from what we disagree about and move toward what we agree about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom, your insights with us. It is always so inspiring to talk to you, and I hope that we will do this again soon, because I know we've only scratched the surface of everything that you've been doing in Nebraska. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hildy. It was my pleasure.
I'm so grateful to Jeff for sharing his observations and experience with us. You know, at Creating the Future, when we teach about building on assets, we talk about 4 types of assets every organization and every community has. There are people assets, people past and present. There are stuff assets, stuff like buildings and computers and vehicles. There are purpose assets. In a nonprofit, that's your mission. In a community, that's the aspirations of your community members. And there are community assets, which are the people assets, the stuff assets, and the purpose assets of everyone else in your community. And oh boy, if there were ever example after example of what it looks like to put all those assets to work for a community, it is everything Jeff shared with us today, and everything the Nebraska Community Foundation is building upon every day. There are so many communities where the people who live there feel like they have nothing. Small communities, rural communities, low-income communities. But when we look through different eyes, asking different questions, we see how much richness those places have to build upon. Jeff's stories always inspire me because they're not about the power of the expert. They're about the power of the people and the places where they live. Sometimes all folks need is someone to walk alongside them, to ask them a different question, to see what is possible, and to support them as they start on that journey. You can learn more about the work that Jeff and the Nebraska Community Foundation are doing at the podcast page for this episode. And of course, if this episode got you thinking, we hope you'll share this podcast with your friends and colleagues and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, you can learn more about Creating the Future's work at creatingthefuture.org. Thank you for being with us today and for wanting to create a better future for our world. We'll see you next time here at Creating the Future.